Hi guys, welcome back to our introduction to practical Python coding in eHealth tutorial for beginners, where we learn about Python coding for digital health or health informatics use. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about variables. So variables in coding are used to hold or to store the value of something temporarily for when you are running your program. So let's get started. I've already got my Jupyter notebook running in my browser. So if you don't know how to run your Jupyter notebook, please check out a previous tutorial. So what I'm gonna do now is create a new Jupyter notebook by going to New, Python 3 here. All right, so that should create the new notebook for me. I'm gonna name this variables. Press enter. Okay, now I got the variables. All right, so variables are useful if you don't yet know what the values of something will be when you write your code. So for example, let's say in healthcare, if you wanted to calculate the body mass index of a person or the BMI of a person, um, let's actually write out the equation for BMI calculation. So BMI equals to weight over the height squared, like this. So what I did here is I put the calculation, wrote it down as Python code, but I don't yet know what the weight or the height of the person yet at the time when I am writing this code. So I just put weight and height as variables. Um, So if you declare something like this, Python will treat it as a variable. And there are certain things that you cannot name as variables. Like there are certain reserved words, like if you put in DEF or something like that, it'll show up a little bit differently on the Jupyter Notebook. So this one will be bolded green. Like these reserved words cannot be used as variable names, but otherwise you can put anything as variables. Um, I believe you cannot also start a variable name with a number, but why would you ever do that anyway? So I have weight and height as a variable name. So they're variables because I don't know the value of them. And BMI is also a variable. Since I don't know weight or height, I also won't know what the value of BMI will be. So that's why I'm putting it as a variable. And the equal sign here will essentially, if you have an equals in Python, what it does is that it'll calculate the right side of the equal sign and then store the value of the right side into the left side of the equal sign. So I have to write BMI equals the weight over this with BMI on the left side of the equation. So if I put, you know, weight over height equals to squared equals to BMI, this will not work because Python will always evaluate the right side and put it into the left side. All right, so let's change this back. So BMI equals to this, right? All right, so if we simply ran this, this will not work. Actually, let me just try. All right, so it says name weight cannot is not defined yet. Yeah, that's why like we don't know what the weight or height is. So it got to here, it's already not defined, but if that successfully went through, it'll say height is not defined. All right, so what we have to do is, so on top of here, we have to say weight equals to, say, 50. So once again, Python will evaluate the right side of the expression and then assign it to the left side of the expression. So if I do that, it'll assign 50 to weight. Note in Python, there's no units. So 50, say 50 kilograms. In Python, you don't put any units. So you just have to remember whatever equation you put has to work with whatever units. So if you're developing a digital health app, when you prompt the user, please input your weight. you should say, please input your weight in kilograms or something like that. Because in your code, you will have no units. All right. Okay. So I have weight and then I have height. Let's say height equals to 1.7. Okay. So I define weight and height. So this Python should be able to calculate my BMI for me. So let's, at the very end, print out the BMI. All right. Okay. So I'm going to press Shift Enter. There we go. 17.3 is the BMI. That's how you do it. So once again, so what we did here was assigning these values to variables and calculating the BMI to be 17.3. So when you actually write the software, you write this line of code. And weight and height, usually if you're developing a digital health app, these will be inputted by the user. And when you get these values from the user and then you perform this calculation, and you can perform whatever logic you want later on. Okay, let's do another example. So this example is a little bit tricky. Okay, so let's say I have, you know, your pH, you know, all right. And then pH, let's say pH of your stomach acid is equal to 1. All right, so once again, so on the right side, I have a 1 here, and Python will evaluate the right side and store that value inside the left side. So it will store 1 into pH. I cannot say 1 equals to pH. It always has to be the variable you want to store the value in on the left side. Okay, and then let's say, after I ingested some antacid into my stomach, my pH increased by 2. So how do I do that? I need to refer to the value of my original pH and assign it to a new pH. So what I can actually do is pH equals to pH plus 2. All right, take a moment and think about this for a sec. This always actually confused me when I was a beginner doing coding because in math you can never do something like this. A variable is say like x equals to x plus 2. This is an impossible equation. But in coding, it's actually a little bit different. Think about it in this terms, what we just discussed before. Um, what Python will actually do is evaluate the right side of the expression, which is pH plus 2. So because our pH was 1, so this will be actually 1 plus 2. And then I get a 3, right? So Python will see a 3 here on the right side of the equation. And then what it'll do is store that 3 inside pH. So this is actually what this equation is telling the Python to do. All right, so if we actually print pH, all right, do Shift Enter, I get 3. Okay, so what happened was I assigned pH of 1, so pH has a value of 1 here. And again, so I did pH plus 2, which is 1 plus 2 is 3. And then I assign it back to pH. So note when you're working with variables in Python, you can assign it any number of times you want. And the newest value will always be printed here. So print pH will take the latest value of pH. I get 3. All right. Okay, so far we've seen, variables, but we've only seen variables with numbers. Variables can also hold values of other data types as well. Um, so we'll see in later tutorials how that will happen. All right, so that's it for this tutorial. Thanks.